St. Petersburg is Russia's head, Moscow is its heart, and Nizhny Novgorod is its pocket. This is Nizhny Novgorod, a commercial and industrial powerhouse near the heart of Russia. A strategic target now, same as it was during the Great Patriotic War. The biggest commercial center of the country before the Bolsheviks shut it down. And of course it is not to be confused with Novgorod Oblast, which it doesn't really have much in common with. So, what are the most important places in the oblast? Why does Nizhny Novgorod have one of the most impressive Kremlins in all of Russia? How did it turn into a major center of commerce? And who claimed Dzerzhinsk to be the most polluted city in the world? Let's roll. Nizhny Novgorod Oblast has a population of 3.3 million. Ethnic Russians make up the vast majority at 95%. In true Russian style, the majority adhere to Russian Orthodox, and the rest are atheist or spiritual but not religious. It is 76,900 square kilometers, which is just a bit bigger than Panama and smaller than Czechia. With the exception of some forestry, there aren't resources to extract, so processing industries predominate in the local economy, providing 83% of the regional GDP. The town of Gorodets is said to be the first fortress and town built within the oblast by Prince Yuri Dolgoruki in 1152, who was a Rurikid prince, a dynasty of the Kievan Rus. Nizhny Novgorod is the administrative center of the oblast, where a majority of the population reside. Dzerzhinsk is interesting for being accused of being one of the most polluted cities in the world, and there is Sarov, which is still a closed and guarded city, where Russian nuclear research is conducted. Let's go check them out! This is Nizhny Novgorod, with a population of over 1.2 million residents. As such, it is the sixth largest city in Russia after Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, Yekaterinburg, and Kazan. Originally, the name was just Novgorod, same as the other Novgorod, just meaning new city. So to distinguish, it's referred to as Novgorod of the lower lands. This is most likely a reference to it being situated downstream of other Russian cities such as Moscow, rather than latitude or altitude. Although some authorities give an earlier date, the city was officially founded on 4th of February 1221 by Yuri II of Vladimir, who presided over Vladimir Suzdal at the time of the Mongol invasion of Rus. Nizhny Novgorod was said to be spared from the brunt of the invasion because it was simply too insignificant at the time. In 1392, long after the Mongols broke up into many smaller states, Russia was left to regroup, and Nizhny Novgorod was incorporated into the Principality of Moscow, and soon became a Russian stronghold against the Volga Tatars. From there, the likes of Ivan the Terrible were able to launch attacks against the Tatar capital of Kazan, which was one of the major hurdles stopping Russians from expanding to the east. As you know, they overcame this struggle, and so Russia exploded as Cossacks rode eastwards and built town after town across the Urals and Siberia, not encountering much resistance until China. Nizhny Novgorod is very conveniently located at the confluence of two major rivers, the Volga and Oka, which run across the whole of Russia and flow into the Caspian Sea. As a result, the first documented fairs and gatherings of merchants go back to the 16th century. An annual fair was established in 1817, and it became the largest and most important in Russia. Contemporaries called it the trading court of Europe and Asia. The Chinese merchants bought furs and skins of all kinds of animals, from foxes, squirrels, to sheep and cow hides to bring back, while the Russians were really into Chinese tea. Millions of rubles and literally tons of tea exchanged hands here. After the 1917 revolution, the fair continued to function for a while, but there was no longer any freedom of trade, which was now completely within the control of the state, and in 1929 they closed down this capitalist, socially hostile phenomenon. On October 7, 1932, the city was renamed to Gorky in honor of the writer Maxim Gorky, who had been born in the city. Gorky was active in the emerging Marxist-communist movement. He publicly opposed the Tsarist regime and for a time closely associated himself with Lenin. For a significant part of his life, he was exiled from Russia and later even the Soviet Union. In 1932, he returned to the USSR on Joseph Stalin's personal invitation and lived there until his death in June 1936. Despite his official reputation, Gorky's relations with the Soviet regime were rather difficult. Modern scholars consider his ideology of God-building as distinct from the the official Marxism-Leninism. His ideas proposed that in place of the abolition of religion, they should be viewed primarily in terms of the psychological and social effect of ritual, myth, and symbolism, and to attempt to harness this force for pro-communist aims. So rather than being atheist like Lenin, the god-builders, such as Gorky, took an official position of agnosticism and wanted to harness the power of religion. Gorky's socialism was not acquired from reading Marx and Engels, but one of a far more practical sense, with the aim of bringing about social justice for the working class. As the trade potential of the city diminished, its industrial importance grew, especially stimulated by the Great Wars. As a result, Nizhny Novgorod, or Gorky, became a prime target for the German Air Force, and it experienced some of the most destructive bombings on the Eastern Front. Its destruction was included in Operation Barbarossa from the very beginning, as it was one of the largest manufacturers and suppliers of weapons for the Red Army. So from October 1941 to June 1943, 43 air raids were carried out. The famous Gorky automobile plant, one of the largest in Russia, which today produces many types of ships and rivercraft, diesel engines, machinery, and machine tools, was then producing tanks, which is why it was the main target for the Luftwaffe. In order to defend it, the Soviets built a full-size dummy model of the main factory and a false village of painted images on the ground. The plant was destroyed, however, and then rebuilt in just 4 months. After the war, the Soviet Union tried to maintain secrecy about what was being developed in Nizhny Novgorod by keeping it a secret city, inaccessible without permission. Keeping it a secret was, however, pretty much impossible, as tourists were always passing by on the Volga. Also, most closed Soviet cities were a lot smaller and had very specific tasks. Nizhny Novgorod got its name back in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, along with many other cities such as St. Petersburg, as the socialist names were abolished in favor of the original historical ones. The dominating feature of the skyline in Nizhny Novgorod today is the Grand Kremlin, with its red brick towers. Under the rule of Ivan III, Nizhny Novgorod played the role of a guard city, having a permanent garrison. It served a place for gathering troops for Moscow's action against the Khanate of Kazan. And with this being a decades-long conflict between Moscow and Kazan, the walls were continuously reinforced. As a result, and to our delight, Nizhny Novgorod has one of the biggest Kremlins in Russia. A lot less attractive is the nearby city of Dzhizhinsk. Just some 35 kilometers west from Nizhny, it's the next biggest city in the oblast. In the past, the city was also amongst Russia's principal production sites for chemical weapons, and it still produces chemicals today. As a result, the city was until recently officially closed to foreign visitors. The manufacture of various chemical weapons started in 1941, particularly concentrating on the production of levisite, a blister agent and lung irritant, the creation of which has been mostly banned since 1993. Chemical weapon production ceased in 1965. Some materials were transferred to storage units, while large amounts of waste material, frequently containing high concentrations of arsenic, were just buried in dumps on the site of the factory. Full dismantling of the mustard gas facility was commenced in 1994, and as of 1998, the lewisite production was still not completely disassembled. So as a result, Dzhizhinsk was accused of being one of the most polluted cities in the world. According to a study by the Blacksmith Institute, Dzhizhinsk is one of the worst polluted cities of the world, and people living there have a life expectancy of just 42 years for men and 47 for women, with the 2003 death rate exceeding its birth rate by 260%. It's unclear exactly how this data was gathered. Parts of Dzhizhinsk's water are contaminated with dioxins and phenols at levels that are also reportedly 17 million times the safe limit. Dzhizhinsk's environmental agency estimates that almost 300,000 tons of chemical waste was dumped in the city between the 1930s and 1998. Of course, these claims are very much disputed by the local authorities. Either way, it seems the legacy of the Cold War has left many environmental black spots throughout the former Soviet Union, and Dzhizhinsk might not be the worst, but for sure it's one of them. Speaking of Cold War weapons programs, here is the city of Sarov. The city still has a defensive perimeter that is guarded by the military, so it is still a closed city. You would need special permission to visit. It is said to be the Russian Center for Nuclear Research. The history of the town can be divided into 2 different periods. In the earlier chapters, it was known as one of the holy places of the Russian Orthodox Church because of its monastery that gave Russia one of its greatest saints. But in 1923, the monastery was closed, and the monks were executed by the Bolsheviks. The monastery buildings were repurposed for producing Katyusha rocket launchers to fight off the Luftwaffe, and by the 1940s, it gradually became the center for research and production of nuclear weapons. Soviet practicality at its finest. Today, the Russian Federal Nuclear Center is responsible for important decisions concerning the development, production, storage, and utilization of nuclear weapons. With a nuclear museum on its territory, this closed town might actually be worth visiting. And Nizhny Novgorod, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the nicer cities in Russia. As long as you go to the right Novgorod, that is. 2 men flew to Russia with plans to watch Argentina take on Croatia during the 2018 World Cup. But they accidentally went to the town of Veliki Novgorod. After their mistake came to light, the 2 fans were contacted by regional officials who said Putin himself had secured them tickets for Argentina's game against Nigeria in St. Petersburg 5 days later. I guess it was a different time. Have you seen my video on Vladivostok yet? I gave this video my all. Check it out. Patreons, I salute you.